Storm over Warlock by Andre Norton, Chapter 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by R.J. Davis. Storm over Warlock by Andre Norton, Chapter 12, The Veil of Illusion. Perhaps his status was that of a prisoner, but Shan was too tired to press for an explanation. He was content to be left alone in the unusual circular, but roofless, room of the structure to which they had brought him. There was a thick, mat-like pallet in one corner, short for the length of his body, but softer than any bed he had rested on since he had left the Terran camp before the coming of the throngs. Above him glimmered those patches of light symbolizing the lost stars. He blinked at them until they all ran together in bands like the jeweled coils on Warlockian bodies. Then he slept, dreamlessly. The Terran awoke with all his senses alert. Some silent alarm might have triggered that instant awareness of himself and his surroundings. There had been no change in the star pattern still overhead. No one had entered the round chamber. Shan rolled over on his mat bed, conscious that all his aches had vanished. Just as his mind was clearly active, so did his body also respond effortlessly to his demands. He was not aware of any hunger or thirst, though a considerable length of time must have passed since he had made his mysteriously contrived exit from the outer world. In spite of the humidity of the air, his ragged garments had dried on his body. Shan got to his feet, trying to order the sorry remnants of his uniform, eager to be on the move, though to where and for what purpose he could not have answered. The door through which he had entered remained closed, refusing to yield to his push. Shan stepped back, eyeing the distance to the top of the partition between the roofless rooms. The walls were smooth with the gloss of a seashell's interior, and the exuberant confidence which had been with him since his awakening refused to accept such a minor obstacle. He made 2 test leaps, both times his fingers striking the wall well below the top of the partition. Shan gathered himself together as might a cat and tried a 3rd time, putting into that effort every last ounce of strength, determination, and will. He made it, though his arms jerked as the weight of his body hung from his hands. Then a scramble, a knee hooked over the top, and he was perched on the wall, able to study the rest of the building. In shape, the structure was unlike anything he had seen on his home world or reproduced in any of the Tri-D records of survey accessible to him. The rooms were either circular or oval, each separated from the next by a short passage, so that the overall impression was that of 10 strings of beads radiating from a central knot of one large chamber, all with the uniform nacre walls and a limited amount of furnishings. As he balanced on the narrow perch, Shan could sight no other movement in the nearest line of rooms, those connected by corridors with his own. He got to his feet to walk the tightrope of the upper walls toward that inner chamber which was the heart of the Warlockian palace, town, apartment dwelling. At least it was the only structure on the island, for he could see the outer rim of that smooth, soft sand ringing it about. The island itself was curiously symmetrical, a perfect oval, too perfect to be a natural outcrop of sand and rock. There was no day or night here in the cavern. The light from the roof patches remained constantly the same, and that flow was abetted within the building by a soft radiation from the walls. Shan reached the next room in line, hunkering down to see within it. To all appearances, the chamber was exactly the same as the one he had just left. There were the same unadorned walls, a thick mat bed against the far side, and no indication of whether it was in use or had not been entered for days. He was on the next section of corridor wall when he caught that faint taint in the air, the very familiar scent of wolverines. Now it provided Shann with a guide as well as a promise of allies. The next bead room gave him what he wanted. Below him, Toggy and Togi paced back and forth. They had already torn to bits the sleeping mat which had been the chamber's single furnishing, and their temper was none too certain. As Shann squatted well above their range of vision, Toggy reared against the opposite wall, his claws finding no hold on the smooth coating of its surface. They were as competently imprisoned as if they had been dropped into a huge fish bowl, and they were not taking to it kindly. How had the animals been brought here? Down that water tunnel by the same unknown method he himself had been transported until that almost disastrous awakening in the center of the flood? The Terran did not doubt that the doors of the room were as securely fastened as those of his own further down the corridor. For the moment, the wolverines were safe. He could not free them, and he was growing increasingly certain that if he found any of his native jailers, it would be at the center of that wheel of rooms and corridors. Shann made no attempt to attract the animal's attention, but kept on along his tightrope path. He passed two more rooms, both empty, both differing in no way from those he had already inspected, and then he came to the central chamber, 4 times as big as any of the rest, and with a much brighter wall light. The Terran crouched, one hand on the surface of the partition top as an additional balance, the other gripping his stunner. For some reason, his captors had not disarmed him. Perhaps they believed they had no necessity to fear his off-world weapon. "Have you grown wings?" The words formed in his brain, bringing with them a sense of calm amusement to reduce all his bold aspiration to the level of a child's first staggering steps. Shann fought his first answering flare of pure irritation. To lose even a fraction of control was to open a door for them. He remained where he was, as if he had never heard that question, surveying the room below with all the impassiveness he could summon. Here the walls were no smooth barrier, but honeycombed with niches in a regular pattern, and in each of the niches rested a polished skull, a non-human skull. Only the outlines of those rank bones were familiar, for just so had looked the great purple-red rock where the wheeling flyers issued from the eye sockets. A rock island had been fashioned into a skull by design or nature. And upon closer observation, the Terran could see that there was a difference between those ranked skulls, a mutation of coloring from row to row, a softening of outline, perhaps by the wearing of time. There was also a table of dull black, rising from the flooring on legs which are no more than a few inches high, so that from his present perch the board appeared to rest on the pavement itself. Behind the table, in a row, as shopkeepers might await a customer, 3 of the Warlockians, seated cross-legged on mats, their hands folded primly before them, and at the side a 4th, the one who he had trapped on the island. Not one of those spiked heads rose to view him, but they knew that he was there. Perhaps they had known the very instant he had left the room or cell in which they had shut him. And they were so very sure of themselves. Once again, Shann subdued a spark of anger. That same patience, with its core of stubborn determination, which had brought him to Warlock, backed his moves now. The Terran swung down, landing lightly on his feet, facing the 3 behind the table.